The entire estate was silent in the dark hills of Scottsdale, Arizona. Every light was off. Every hallway was still. The kind of silence that only existed in houses too big for the people who lived in them. Minjun Kang could not sleep. He had not slept properly in 4 nights. A deal with a rival family in San Francisco had gone sideways earlier that week, and the details kept circling through his mind like vultures. Numbers, names, leverage points, countermoves. His brain would not shut off no matter how many times he turned over in his bed and stared at the ceiling. So he did what he always did when the insomnia hit. He got up, pulled on a plain black t-shirt, and walked barefoot through the marble corridors of his mansion toward the kitchen. A glass of water. Maybe that would settle him. But he stopped halfway down the east wing staircase. He heard something. It was faint at first. So faint it could have been the wind pushing against the estate windows or the house settling in the cool desert night. But Minjun had survived in his world by trusting his instincts and his ears. He had learned a long time ago that the sounds most people ignored were usually the ones that mattered most. He stood completely still on the staircase and listened harder. It was crying. Someone in his house was crying at midnight, not soft sniffling, not the quiet kind that a person could swallow back down. This was the kind of crying a person only did when they believed with absolute certainty that no one in the world could hear them. Deep, broken, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere near the back of the first floor. Minjun followed the sound. He moved silently through the dark corridor past the formal dining room, past the library, past the second kitchen, until he reached the small utility room near the staff quarters. The door was slightly open. A sliver of pale light leaked out from inside. He pushed the door open. And there, sitting on the cold tile floor with her knees pulled tight to her chest, still wearing her gray maid's uniform even though her shift had ended hours ago, was Laura. Laura Whitfield, 26 years old, his live-in housekeeper for the past 5 months. The woman who ironed his shirts with military precision, who kept every surface in this 12,000-square-foot estate spotless, who moved through his home like a ghost because she had learned quickly that Minjun valued silence above almost everything else. She was sitting on that cold floor, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in one hand and her phone in the other, and she was crying so hard her entire body was trembling. The moment she saw him standing in the doorway, her eyes went wide with absolute terror. She scrambled to her feet, nearly slipping on the tile, wiping her face frantically with the back of her hand. "I am so sorry, Mr. Kang. I am so sorry. It will not happen again. I will be quiet. I am sorry." The apologies tumbled out of her like she had rehearsed them for exactly this moment. She was already backing toward the wall, her shoulders hunched, her chin tucked, her whole body folding inward like she was trying to make herself small enough to disappear, like she expected to be fired on the spot. Minjun did not say anything for a long moment. He just looked at her. This was a man who ran a multi-million-dollar empire, a man who sat across from dangerous people in rooms where one wrong word could start a war. He had trained himself to read people the way other men read newspapers. Body language, micro-expressions, the distance between what someone said and what their hands were doing while they said it. He could spot a lie from across a conference table before the liar even finished the sentence. And right now, what he read on Laura Whitfield's face was not embarrassment. It was not the awkwardness of an employee caught in an unprofessional moment. It was devastation, the kind that came from a place so deep it could not be faked. He looked at the crumpled paper in her hand. He looked at her phone. He looked at the redness around her eyes that told him she had been crying for a very long time, probably long before he heard her. Hours, maybe. He asked her one question, simple, direct, the way he asked everything. "What happened?" Laura shook her head quickly. "It is nothing, Mr. Kang. It is personal. I apologize for disturbing you. I will go to my room." She moved toward the door, but Minjun did not step aside. He was not blocking her intentionally, but his presence filled the doorframe completely. He was 6'1", broad-shouldered, with a jawline that looked carved from stone and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb the dim light in the room. He was not a man people said no to. Not because he demanded obedience with words, but because something in his stillness made it clear that the conversation was not over until he decided it was. He asked again, not louder, quieter actually. "What is on that paper?" And something about the way he asked it. Something about the fact that in 5 months of working for this man, she had never once heard him lower his voice like that. Something about the unexpected gentleness buried under all that authority made Laura break. She unfolded the crumpled paper with shaking hands and held it out to him. Minjun took it. He read it. His expression did not change. Not a single muscle moved on his face, but something behind his eyes shifted. Something cold moved through him, not cold like cruelty, cold like controlled fury. The paper was a letter from a hospital billing department in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was a final notice of outstanding medical debt. The amount owed was $412,000. The patient listed was not Laura. The patient was a 7-year-old girl named Zoe Whitfield, Laura's daughter. And the diagnosis printed on the billing statement was stage 3 Wilms tumor. Kidney cancer in a 7-year-old. Laura started talking then, and once she started, she could not stop. The words poured out of her like water through a cracked dam. She told Minjun everything. Her daughter Zoe had been diagnosed 14 months ago. What started as complaints about tummy aches turned into a mass on her left kidney. The doctors said it was treatable. They said the survival rates were good. But the treatment was aggressive and expensive, and Laura's insurance from her old hotel housekeeping job covered almost nothing. She told him she had emptied her savings within 2 months. She had maxed out credit cards. She had borrowed from family members who did not have money to lend. She had sold everything she owned that was worth more than $20. And when the debt hit $200,000 and the collection notices started coming, she had made the hardest decision of her life. She had seen the job listing for a live-in housekeeper at a private estate in Scottsdale. The pay was triple what she made at the hotel, room and board included. She did not know the employer was a Korean syndicate leader. She did not know anything about Min Jun Kang's world. She only knew the salary could keep her daughter's chemotherapy going. She had kissed Zoe goodbye in a hospital room in Raleigh, told her she was going on a work trip, and flown to Arizona. That was 5 months ago. "I have been sending every paycheck home," Laura said, her voice raw and scraped hollow from crying. "Every single dollar. I eat the leftover food from your kitchen so I do not have to spend money on groceries. I own 2 sets of clothes outside of this uniform. I have not seen my daughter in 5 months because I cannot afford the flight." She paused, swallowed hard, then she told him what had broken her tonight. "My mother called me 3 hours ago. She said the hospital is threatening to stop Zoe's chemo treatments because the debt is too large. They said if we cannot make a substantial payment by the end of the month, they are going to suspend her treatment plan." Laura looked at Minjun with eyes that had nothing left to hide. She is 7 years old. She still believes in the tooth fairy, and they are going to stop treating her because I cannot pay fast enough. Minjun stood there holding the paper. The mansion around them was worth $14 million. The watch sitting on his nightstand upstairs cost more than Laura's entire medical debt. And this woman had been walking past his wealth every single day for 5 months, cleaning it, polishing it, organizing it, while her child lay in a hospital bed 2,000 miles away and the bills were swallowing her whole. He folded the paper neatly. He handed it back to her. And then he said something Laura did not expect. "Go to bed. We will talk in the morning." Then he turned and walked out. Laura stood alone in the utility room, confused, embarrassed, and absolutely certain she had just lost her job. "Now let me ask you something real. If you were Minjun, a man with more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, and you just found out the woman cleaning your house has been silently drowning so her little girl can survive, what would you do?" I want to see your response in the comment, and do well to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. Now let's continue. Laura barely slept that night. She was up before dawn, earlier than usual, because she was certain that today was her last day in this house. She showered in the tiny staff bathroom, put on her pressed uniform, and began her routine as if nothing had happened. She told herself that if she just worked perfectly today, if she made everything flawless, maybe he would let her finish out the week. She needed every last day of pay. She cleaned the primary suite sitting room. She set up Minjun's breakfast the way he liked it. Black coffee, no sugar, a bowl of fresh fruit, and a single hard-boiled egg. She arranged his morning newspapers. She checked that the thermostat was set to exactly 69 degrees because that was what he preferred. She had memorized every single one of his habits over 5 months, not because anyone told her to, but because she understood that keeping this job meant keeping her daughter alive. Minjun came downstairs at 7:15. He was dressed in a fitted dark navy suit. He sat down at the long dining table and ate in silence while Laura stood near the kitchen entrance, waiting to clear plates. This was their routine. Every morning for 5 months, this was what they did. They had never had a real conversation. He gave instructions. She followed them. That was the arrangement. But today, after he finished eating, he did not stand up and leave for the office. He set down his coffee cup and looked directly at her. "Sit down." Laura hesitated. In 5 months, she had never once sat at this table. She did not even sit in the main rooms when he was out of the house. She began to say she was fine standing. Minjun repeated himself, "Sit down, Laura." It was the first time he had ever called her by her first name. She sat across from him, her hands clasped tight in her lap, her back perfectly straight, every muscle in her body bracing for the words, "You are terminated." That was not what he said. He told her he had made 3 phone calls that morning. The first was to his personal attorney. The second was to a medical concierge firm based in Manhattan. The third was to Duke University Hospital in Durham, North Carolina, which had one of the top pediatric oncology programs in the entire country. Laura stared at him. She did not understand what he was telling her. Minjun explained, and he explained it the same way he explained everything, flat, precise, without decoration. He was going to pay off the $412,000 medical debt in full. Today, he was going to have Zoe transferred from the hospital in Raleigh to Duke, which was less than 30 minutes away, where she would be treated by one of the best pediatric cancer specialists in the United States. And he was going to cover all future treatment costs until Zoe was cancer-free. Laura's mouth opened, but nothing came out. He was not finished. He told her she would fly to North Carolina that weekend to see her daughter. His private plane would take her. She would have 5 days. When she returned, her position at the estate would be exactly the same. Nothing about her job would change. Laura started shaking. She did not cry this time. She was too stunned to cry. The words he was saying did not make sense. They were arranged in an order her brain refused to process because things like this did not happen to people like her. People like her did not get rescued. People like her just kept drowning until they went under. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this? I am nobody to you. I am your maid." Minjun looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something that was not sentimental, not warm, not poetic. He said it in the same measured tone he used to discuss business. No child should lose their life because of a billing department. He stood up, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out of the dining room. Laura sat at that table alone for a very long time. And for the first time in 14 months, the tears that fell down her cheeks were not from despair. To understand why Laura Whitfield was the kind of woman who would move 2,000 miles from her sick daughter and sleep in a staff room the size of a closet, you had to understand where she came from. She grew up in Greensboro, North Carolina, working-class neighborhood, small house with a yard her mother kept neat even when they could barely afford the water bill. Her father left when Laura was 11, just walked out one Saturday morning and never came back. No note, no explanation. Her mother, Denise, never spoke about him again. She just picked up extra shifts at the assisted living facility where she worked as a nursing assistant and kept going. Denise raised Laura and her younger brother, Wesley, on a salary that should not have been enough for one person, let alone 3. But Denise was the kind of woman who could stretch $1 so thin you could see through it. She kept food on the table, clothes on their backs, and a roof over their heads through sheer force of will and a stubbornness that bordered on supernatural. Laura got pregnant at 19. The father was a man named Curtis Webb. He was charming and unreliable and full of promises that dissolved like sugar in rain. When Laura told him about the baby, Curtis said all the right things. He said he would be there. He said they would figure it out together. He said he loved her. He was gone within 3 months, moved to Atlanta, changed his phone number, vanished like smoke. Zoe was born healthy and perfect on a Tuesday afternoon in July. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, with enormous brown eyes and a set of lungs that could be heard 3 rooms away. Laura held her daughter and made a promise that she would give this child everything she never had: stability, safety, a parent who stayed. For 6 years, Laura kept that promise. She worked as a hotel housekeeper at a mid-range chain in Raleigh. The pay was modest but steady. Her mother helped with childcare. Zoe started school. She was bright and curious and obsessed with space. She wanted to be an astronaut. She told everyone who would listen, including the mailman, the grocery store clerk, and her kindergarten teacher, that she was going to be the first person to live on Mars. Then Zoe got sick. It started with stomach aches that Laura thought were growing pains. Then came the fatigue. Then came the day Zoe's teacher called Laura at work and said Zoe had thrown up twice and could barely stand. The pediatrician ran tests. The tests led to imaging. The imaging led to a specialist. And the specialist sat Laura down in a small beige office and said the words that rearranged every atom in her universe. Stage 3 Wilms tumor. Treatable, the doctors said. Survival rates were good, they said, but the treatment was aggressive. Chemotherapy, possible surgery, months of hospital stays, and the cost was staggering. Laura's hotel job had basic insurance, but the out-of-pocket costs devoured her savings within 2 months. The copays, the specialists, the medications, the scans, the hospital stays. Every bill was a punch to the chest. She took out loans. She maxed credit cards. She borrowed from an uncle who was already behind on his own mortgage. She sold her car and started taking the bus. When the debt passed $200,000 and the collection calls started coming 3 times a day, Laura made the decision that would lead her to Min Jun Kang's doorstep. She kissed Zoe goodbye in a hospital room. She told her daughter she was going on a work trip. Zoe asked if she could bring back a souvenir. Laura said she would bring back the best souvenir in the world. Zoe said she wanted a rock from the desert because deserts were almost like Mars. Laura smiled and promised. Then she walked out of the hospital room and cried in the parking lot for 45 minutes before she could drive. That was 5 months ago. And every single night since, after her duties at the estate were done, Laura called her mother on FaceTime, asked about Zoe, listened to her daughter talk about the drawings she made that day, told her she loved her more than all the stars, and then hung up and cried silently in her small staff room. Until last night, when the crying would not stay silent anymore. Laura flew to North Carolina on Min Jun's private plane that Friday. She had never been on a private plane before. She had never even been in first class. She sat in a leather seat that was wider than her bed at the estate and stared out the window and felt like she was dreaming someone else's life. A car was waiting for her at Raleigh-Durham International Airport. It drove her straight to Duke University Hospital. The transfer had already happened. Zoe had been moved from the Raleigh hospital 2 days earlier, and the difference was staggering. The room was brighter, bigger, warmer. There were murals of animals and forests painted on the walls. There was a child life specialist assigned specifically to Zoe. The medical team was world-class. Laura's mother, Denise, was sitting in a chair beside Zoe's bed. Denise was 57 now, with deep lines on her face and hands that showed decades of hard physical work. When she saw Laura walk through the door, she stood up so fast the chair scraped against the floor, and she grabbed her daughter and held on like she might disappear if she let go. Then Laura looked at the bed. Zoe was smaller than she remembered. The chemotherapy had thinned her hair, and her face had that pale, hollowed look that hospitals put on children who had been inside them too long. But she still had those enormous brown eyes. She still had the gap-toothed smile that had always made Laura feel like everything in the world could be okay. Zoe saw her mother, and her whole face lit up like a sunrise. "Mommy." She said it so loud that a nurse poked her head into the room to check. Laura crossed the room in 3 steps, climbed into the hospital bed, gathered her daughter against her chest, and held on. She held on and she cried, and she did not try to stop, and she did not care who saw. 5 months. 5 months of phone screens and pretending everything was fine and swallowing the lump in her throat when Zoe asked when Mommy was coming home. 5 months of sleeping alone in a room 2,000 miles from the only person who mattered. Laura spent the entire weekend at the hospital. She read to Zoe. She braided what was left of her hair. They watched cartoons together and ate Jell-O, and Laura slept in the hospital chair beside Zoe's bed with her hand resting on her daughter's arm, so that even in sleep she would know she was there. She also met with Zoe's new oncologist, Dr. Priya Nair. Dr. Nair was calm and thorough and honest. She explained the treatment plan. The tumor was aggressive, but it was responding to chemotherapy. Zoe would need at least 6 more months of treatment, possibly surgery down the line, but Dr. Nair was cautiously optimistic. The fact that Zoe was now at a top-tier facility significantly improved her chances. Laura asked what the total projected cost would be through the end of treatment. Dr. Nair hesitated. Then she told her. With everything included, they were looking at potentially over $700,000. Laura felt the floor drop. Min-Jun had paid $400,000, but there was potentially $300,000 more to come. She could not ask him for that. She could not. He had already done more than any stranger had ever done for her. She would not become a burden. She would find a way. She always found a way. While Laura was in North Carolina, something unexpected happened at the Kang estate. Min-Jun noticed her absence. Not in a practical sense. He had arranged a temporary replacement through his head of household, a competent woman who performed every task adequately. The house was clean. The meals were prepared. The routine was maintained. But something was off. Something was missing in a way that Min-Jun could not quite name but felt constantly, like a low hum that had suddenly stopped. Laura had a way of anticipating what he needed before he needed it. She knew he preferred the curtains in his study drawn halfway at exactly 4 in the afternoon, when the sun hit the west side of the house. She knew he took his evening tea with exactly 1 ice cube, because he did not like it too hot. She knew to leave a glass of water on his nightstand at 9:30 every night, because he always forgot to hydrate before bed. These were small things, invisible things, the kind of details that only mattered when they were gone. On Saturday evening, Min-Jun found himself standing in the utility room where he had found Laura crying. He did not know why he walked in there. There was nothing to see. The room was empty and clean and smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. But he stood there for a moment, his hands in his pockets, and something turned over inside his chest that he did not have a name for. He left the room and told himself it meant nothing. Laura returned to the estate on Sunday night. She was quieter than before, but there was something different in her eyes. A softness, a warmth, like seeing her daughter alive and receiving real treatment from real doctors at a real hospital had given her something she had not had in over a year. Hope. She went to Min-Jun's study to let him know she had returned. He was sitting behind his desk, reviewing something on his laptop, the blue light from the screen cutting sharp angles across his face. He glanced up at her when she knocked on the open door. "I am back," Laura said. She stood in the doorway with her hands clasped in front of her, and she tried to find words big enough for what he had done. She could not find them, so she said the truest thing she could. "I do not have words that are big enough, so I am just going to say thank you, and I am going to mean it with everything I have." Min-Jun looked at her. For just a moment, something cracked in his stone-faced composure. A flicker. A hairline fracture in the wall he kept between himself and the world. Then he nodded. "Good, get some rest." Laura turned and left his study. But she did not see what happened after she left. She did not see Min-Jun lean back in his chair and close his eyes and sit in complete silence for a long time, pressing his thumb against his temple the way he always did when something was bothering him. Something was bothering him, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, it was not business. Meanwhile, Min-Jun's right-hand man and oldest friend, Seung-ho Park, received a call from a contact in San Francisco. The Yun family, the rival syndicate that had been pressuring Min-Jun for months, had been asking questions. Not about business, about Min-Jun's household, about his staff, about who was close to him. Seung-ho hung up the phone and stared at the wall for a long time. This was not good. Something shifted between Min-Jun and Laura over the weeks that followed. It did not happen in one dramatic moment. It happened slowly, almost invisibly, the way a crack spreads through glass. It started with small changes in routine. Min-Jun began staying home more often in the evenings instead of going to his operations office downtown. He started eating dinner at the estate. When Laura served his meals, he began asking her to stay for a moment. He would ask about Zoe. How was the treatment going? What did the doctors say this week? Was she eating? Was she sleeping through the night? Laura was cautious at first. She answered politely and briefly. She was still his employee. She knew the boundaries. But Min-jun kept asking, and his questions were not surface-level small talk. He asked specific things: white blood cell counts, medication names, side effects. He tracked her daughter's medical progress with the same precision he used to manage his business operations. Laura realized that he was actually listening, not performing interest, not making polite conversation to fill silence. This man genuinely cared about whether a 7-year-old girl he had never met was getting better. One evening, Min-jun was in his study and Laura brought his tea. He was on the phone, speaking rapid Korean, and his voice had that hard edge she had learned to recognize as trouble. She set the tea down and turned to leave, but he held up one finger. Wait. He finished the call, set the phone down, and rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked tired. For the first time since she had known him, Min-jun Kang looked genuinely exhausted. She asked if he was okay. The words left her mouth before she could stop them. She had never asked him a personal question before. She braced for the shutdown. He did not shut her down. He told her the situation with the rival family in San Francisco was escalating. He did not give details, but the fact that he said it at all told Laura something important. He needed to say it out loud to someone who was not calculating angles or measuring loyalty. Laura did something instinctive. She sat in the chair across from his desk, the same way he had told her to sit at the dining table weeks ago. She did not offer advice. She did not try to fix anything. She was just present. They sat in silence for 10 minutes. Then Min-jun looked at her and said, very quietly, "Thank you." It was the first time he had ever thanked her for anything. Over the following days, their conversations grew longer and more personal. Min-jun learned that Laura used to paint before Zoe got sick. Watercolors, mostly. She had given it up because art supplies cost money and every dollar had to go to treatment. Laura learned that Min-jun had lost his mother when he was 15. Stomach cancer. She had been sick for 2 years, and during those 2 years, Min-jun's father, a cold and powerful man, refused to let anyone in the family show weakness. Grief was weakness. Tears were weakness. When Min-jun's mother died, his father made him stand at her funeral without shedding a single tear while he watched like it was a test. Min-jun passed the test. He did not cry. He locked his grief in a vault inside his chest, and he never opened it again. When Laura heard this, something clicked into place. His reaction to Zoe's situation. His immediate, almost mechanical decision to pay the medical bills. It was not charity. It was personal. He had watched his own mother die of cancer and could do nothing because his father would not allow it. Now he was a man with unlimited resources, and a child was sick, and he refused to stand by and do nothing. Not again. This realization changed how Laura saw him completely. He was not a cold, detached employer. He was a man who had been forbidden to grieve at 15 years old and had spent every year since then building walls so high that no one could see the boy still standing behind them. One night, Laura was in the staff kitchen on FaceTime with Zoe. It was a good day. Zoe was laughing and holding up a drawing she had made, a purple spaceship flying past Saturn. Min-jun walked through the kitchen and stopped when he heard the small, bright voice coming from Laura's phone. Laura instinctively angled the screen away, but Zoe had already spotted movement. "Mommy, who is that?" Laura hesitated. Min-jun looked at her. Then he did something that stunned her completely. He stepped into the frame. He looked at the phone. Zoe stared at him with wide, curious eyes. "Hello," Min-jun said. Zoe tilted her head. "Are you Mommy's friend?" A beat of silence. Then Min-jun said, "Yes." Zoe grinned that gap-toothed grin. "You look serious. You should smile more." And Min-jun, the man who controlled one of the most powerful Korean syndicates on the West Coast, who had not smiled in front of another human being in longer than he could remember, felt the corner of his mouth twitch upward. Laura watched this happen, and something inside her chest broke wide open. What Laura felt growing between them terrified her. She told herself every night that it could not happen. He was her employer. He was a crime boss. She was a housekeeper from Greensboro, North Carolina, with maxed-out credit cards and a child in the hospital. This was not a world she belonged in, and whatever was building between them would destroy her if she let it. But she could not stop it, because Min-jun was not what she had expected. Under the discipline and the stone-cold composure and the emotional armor, There was a man who had paid $500,000 to save a child he had never met. A man who said hello to a 7-year-old on FaceTime. A man who sat in silence with his housekeeper because her presence gave him a peace he could not find anywhere else in his life. Minjun was fighting the same battle on his side and losing it badly. He had never allowed anyone close enough to matter. In his world, closeness was a vulnerability, and vulnerability was a weapon other people used against you. He knew this better than anyone alive. But Laura was already close. She had been close for weeks, and he had not seen it coming because she had gotten close not through strategy or seduction, but through pure, quiet, stubborn kindness. Late one night, a file marked urgent landed on Minjun's desk from Seung-ho. It was an intelligence report from their contacts in San Francisco. The Yun family had identified Laura. They knew her name. They knew she worked in Minjun's household. And they knew about Zoe. Minjun read the report. His jaw tightened. His hand gripped the edge of his desk so hard the wood creaked under his fingers. Someone had been feeding the Yuns information from inside his organization. There was a traitor in his circle, and they had put Laura and her daughter directly in the crosshairs. Minjun moved fast. By 6 the next morning, he had assembled his inner circle at his private office in downtown Scottsdale. 5 people in the room. Minjun, Seung-ho, his head of security, Yi-won, his financial officer, Di-hyun, and his logistics coordinator, a sharp Korean-American woman named Hana Cho. Minjun did not tell them what he knew. Not yet. He watched them instead. He laid out the Yun family situation in general terms and studied their reactions with the cold focus of a man who knew one of them had betrayed him. Afterward, he pulled Seung-ho aside. They set a trap. Different pieces of false information were fed to each member of the inner circle. Then they waited to see which piece surfaced in San Francisco. 3 days later, they had their answer. The false information fed to Di-hyun, the financial officer, was the piece that reached the Yuns. Di-hyun had been selling information for $2 million and the promise of a position in the Yun organization. Minjun's reaction was terrifying in its calm. He did not rage. He had Di-hyun brought in. He showed him the evidence. Di-hyun broke immediately, sweating and stammering excuses. He said he did not think household information was important. He did not know they would target anyone. Minjun asked one question. What exactly did you tell them about the woman in my house? Di-hyun swallowed hard. He had told them Laura's full name, that she had a daughter in a North Carolina hospital, that Minjun was personally paying for the child's medical care. The Yuns interpreted this as a personal attachment, a pressure point. Di-hyun was excommunicated, stripped of every asset, every connection, every protection. He was gone within the hour. But the damage was done. That night, Minjun went to Laura's staff quarters. He had never been to her room before. He knocked. She opened the door in a white t-shirt and sweatpants, her hair wrapped, surprised to see him. He stepped inside and closed the door. And he told her the truth, not all of it, but enough. A rival organization had learned about her and about Zoe. They might try to use that information. He had already increased security, but he needed her to understand the seriousness. Laura listened without panicking. She looked at him with those steady brown eyes and asked the only question that mattered to her. Is my daughter safe? He told her yes. Private security was already stationed at Duke Hospital. 2 guards around the clock near Zoe's room. Denise had been briefed. Laura nodded slowly. Then she asked a second question. Is this because of me, because you helped me? Minjun did not answer right away. Because the truth was that his enemies had identified Laura as a pressure point, because they correctly saw that she meant something to him. She did mean something to him, and that terrified him more than any rival family ever could. This is because of who I am, he said, not because of anything you did. Laura looked at him. She could tell he was not telling her everything. But she could also tell that this man, who could have simply fired her and eliminated the problem, was instead standing in her tiny room at midnight telling her the truth and promising her daughter's safety. She reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time they had ever had physical contact. Her fingers were warm, his were cold. She held on for just a second, then she let go. Minjun left the room. Neither of them slept that night. The Yun family made their next move through a polished intermediary named Philip Yun, the old patriarch's grandson. He requested a meeting with Min Jun at a private restaurant in Beverly Hills, neutral ground. The meeting was tense but civilized. Philip was Ivy League educated, casually dangerous, and his proposal was straightforward. The Yuns wanted Min Jun to cede his Southern California operations, specifically his legitimate real estate and hospitality holdings in Beverly Hills and Newport Beach. In exchange, they would leave his Arizona and Nevada operations alone. Min Jun declined. Philip smiled. Then, very casually, he mentioned he had heard Min Jun had been generous lately, something about a hospital in North Carolina. The message was unmistakable. We know about her. We know about the child. We can reach them. Min Jun did not react. He finished his water, stood, and buttoned his jacket. He told Philip to give his grandfather a message. If anyone connected to the Yun family went near Laura Whitfield or her daughter, it would not be a business dispute anymore. It would be something else entirely. He walked out. Back in Scottsdale, despite the danger swirling around them, Min Jun and Laura continued to grow closer. The threat had torn down the last wall of employer-employee formality between them. They spent evenings in his study. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence. The quiet between them had become its own language. One evening, Min Jun asked Laura what Zoe wanted to be when she grew up. Laura smiled. She changes her answer every week. Last week it was a veterinarian. This week it is an astronaut again. She paused. She told me once that she wants to go to space because maybe in space the medicine would not taste so bad. Min Jun looked at her. Something in his face shifted. She sounds brave. She gets it from her grandmother, Laura said. I think she gets it from you. It was the most personal, emotionally honest thing he had ever said to her. Laura's eyes burned. She looked away. When she looked back, he was already focused on his laptop, as if the moment had not happened. But his hand on the desk was not quite steady. Then two things happened almost simultaneously that threw everything into chaos. First, Laura's phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She answered. It was Curtis Webb, Zoe's biological father. The man who had vanished 7 years ago. He said he had heard Zoe was sick. He said he wanted to see her. He said he had changed. And when Laura told him to lose her number, he said he would file for visitation in family court. Second, Laura's mother Denise called from Duke Hospital, her voice shaking. A stranger had come to the hospital, a well-dressed Korean man. He had asked the front desk for Zoe Whitfield's room number. The security team intercepted him before he reached the pediatric floor. But as he was being escorted out, the man had looked up at the hallway window where Denise was standing. And he smiled. Laura's blood went cold. She ran through the estate to find Min Jun. Everything accelerated after that night. Min Jun made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He told Laura to bring Zoe and Denise to Arizona, all of them under one roof. Zoe would be transferred to Phoenix Children's Hospital. They would live at the estate, the most secure location he controlled. Laura protested. It was too much. She was already drowning in what she owed him. Min Jun stopped her. I am not doing this for you, Laura. I am doing this because I cannot lose anyone else to something I could have prevented. Laura heard the word else and understood exactly what he meant. His mother, the woman who died of cancer when he was 15 while his father stood by and called grief weakness. 3 days later, Zoe and Denise arrived in Scottsdale via private medical transport. Denise stood in the middle of her guest suite at the Kang estate, a room larger than the apartment she had lived in for 30 years, and said nothing for a very long time. That night, she pulled Laura aside. What does this man want from you? Nothing, Mama. He has not asked for anything. Denise looked unconvinced. Men like that always want something. Laura did not respond, because she did not know how to explain what was happening between her and Min Jun. She barely understood it herself. 2 days later, Min Jun met Zoe in person for the first time. She was sitting up in her hospital bed at Phoenix Children's, coloring. She had a pink bandana on her head and a hospital bracelet on her tiny wrist. She looked up at Min Jun with those enormous brown eyes and recognized him immediately. You are Mommy's friend, the serious one. Min Jun stood at the foot of her bed. This was a man who had stared down the most dangerous people in the syndicate world without flinching. But a 7-year-old cancer patient looking at him with curiosity and absolutely zero fear nearly broke him where he stood. "I hear you want to be an astronaut," he said. Zoe's face lit up. "Yes, do you know any astronauts?" "No, but I can find one." Zoe grinned and held up her coloring page. "What color should I make the spaceship?" Minjun studied the page with genuine consideration. "Black." Zoe wrinkled her nose. "That is boring. I am making it purple." Something happened to Minjun in that moment. Something fundamental and irreversible. The armor he had spent his entire adult life building did not crack. It did not break. It simply ceased to exist. He sat down beside Zoe's bed and stayed for 2 hours. When they left the hospital, Laura was crying quietly in the passenger seat. Not from sadness, from something overwhelming and unnameable. The sight of this powerful, guarded man sitting patiently beside her daughter's bed, debating the color of a spaceship, had undone something inside her that she could never put back together. In the car, without looking at her, Minjun reached across the center console and took her hand. She held on. Neither of them let go for the entire drive home. Minjun's attorneys handled Curtis Webb with surgical precision. The background check revealed a history of financial instability, 2 prior arrests for writing bad checks, and a string of broken leases across 3 states. 7 years of zero contact, 0 child support, 0 effort. His legal team filed a motion reviewing Curtis's parental standing based on abandonment. But before that could resolve, the Yun family played their final card. An envelope arrived at the Kang estate, hand-delivered by courier, addressed to Laura Whitfield. Inside was a dossier compiled by a private investigator the Yuns had hired. The dossier detailed something Laura had never told Minjun, something she had never told anyone. 6 years earlier, when Laura was 20 years old and completely alone with a baby and no money and no help, a man had offered her cash to open credit accounts using falsified income information. Laura, desperate and terrified, did it twice. She used the money to pay rent and buy groceries for Zoe. She never did it again. She was never caught, but the records existed. The dossier included copies of the original applications with her signature. It also included a draft letter addressed to the Arizona State Attorney General's office alleging fraud. A handwritten note accompanied the documents. "We all have secrets. Some are more expensive than others. Convince him to take our deal or this goes public. And then it goes to family court, where your friend Curtis would love to use it." The Yuns were not just threatening Laura. They were engineering her destruction. If the fraud went public, it would give Curtis ammunition in a custody fight. It could give a judge reason to question her fitness as a mother. It could cost her Zoe. And the cruelest part was that they wanted her to betray the one person who had saved her. They wanted her to use Minjun's feelings against him. Laura read the dossier and threw up in the bathroom. When Minjun returned from a 2-day trip to Newport Beach, where he had been fighting off a coordinated regulatory attack on his business holdings, Laura was waiting for him in his study. She looked like she had not slept in days. Her eyes were swollen. Her hands would not stop shaking. She told him everything. The dossier, Curtis at the hospital, the fraud from 6 years ago, the Yun family's ultimatum, every ugly, terrifying, shameful piece. Then she said the words that took more courage than anything she had ever done. "They want me to convince you to give up your business. They said if I do not, they will send this to a prosecutor and to Curtis's lawyers. I could lose my daughter, but I will not betray you. I will not do it. So I need you to know the truth, all of it, before someone else uses it against you." She braced for anger, for betrayal, for the door. Minjun read the dossier. He read the note. He set both documents on his desk. Then he looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was not anger. It was not disappointment. It was something deeper and fiercer and more frightening than either. It was the look of a man who had just been given a reason to end a war. "You were 20 years old," he said, "alone with a baby, and no one in the world was helping you, and you opened 2 credit accounts to keep your daughter fed." He paused. "That is not a crime, that is survival." Laura broke. She had been holding herself together with nothing but willpower and terror for days, and those words shattered every wall she had left. She started crying, not the silent, controlled crying he had found in the utility room that first night. This was open, raw, full-body crying. The sound a person makes when they have been carrying an impossible weight, and someone finally tells them they do not have to carry it alone. Min-jun crossed the room. He pulled her against his chest. She pressed her face into his shoulder and sobbed. He wrapped his arms around her and held her. He held her like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. His chin rested against the top of her head, and he did not let go. When she finally pulled back, her face streaked with tears, Min-jun cupped her face in both hands. He looked into her eyes. "No one is taking your daughter, not Curtis, not the Yuns, not anyone. Do you hear me?" Laura nodded. Then Min-jun said one more thing, quiet and certain and absolute. "I'm going to end this." He picked up his phone. He called Seung-ho. He said 4 words. "Call a family meeting." Seung-ho asked which family. "All of them." Min-jun Kang did not do what his enemies expected. He did not fight in the shadows. He did not retaliate with threats or counterattacks or violence. He did something far more devastating. He called a summit. A full summit of every major Korean syndicate family with territory between San Francisco and Phoenix had not been convened in over a decade. There were 5 families in total, including Min-jun's and the Yuns. The summit was held at a private estate in Beverly Hills owned by the Bay family of Seattle, the eldest and most respected family, who served as mediators. Min-jun walked in with Seung-ho and Yi-won. Yun Tae-seok, the 70-year-old patriarch, was already seated at the head of the opposing side, flanked by his grandson Philip. The old man looked pleased, like a chess player who believed he was 3 moves from checkmate. He was wrong. Min-jun addressed the summit calmly and methodically. He did not raise his voice. He presented evidence. Meticulously documented, verified, undeniable evidence that the Yun family had violated the foundational agreements between the families by targeting a civilian, a child under medical care, for leverage in a business dispute. In this world, there were rules, unwritten, brutal, but absolute. And the most fundamental rule, the one that had kept the families from all-out war for 3 decades, was simple. Civilians, especially children, were never used as pawns. Min-jun laid out everything. The dossier, the private investigator, the man sent to smile at a grandmother through a hospital window, the blackmail letter, the attempt to weaponize a mother's desperate past against her. The room went silent. The heads of the other families looked at Yun Tae-seok. Philip Yun tried to spin it, calling it standard information gathering, an exaggeration. Min-jun cut him off. He looked directly at Philip and spoke in a voice that could have frozen the air between them. "You sent a man to stand outside a 7-year-old cancer patient's hospital room and smile at her grandmother through the window. That is not due diligence. That is a declaration." Bae Sung-min, the 80-year-old Seattle patriarch who had seen everything there was to see in this world, spoke. The Yun family had overstepped. The other family heads agreed. Unanimous. The ruling was swift. Yun Tae-seok had to withdraw all operations from Arizona immediately. Cease all intelligence gathering on Min-jun's household. Pay reparations. The standing agreement would be amended to include explicit protections for household staff and their families. Yun Tae-seok agreed because he had no choice. He was humiliated in front of his peers, in front of his own grandson. The most powerful thing Min-jun could have done to him was exactly what he did. He did not destroy him with force. He destroyed him with the truth. Before leaving, Min-jun walked to the old man's seat. He leaned down so only Tae-seok could hear. "If you ever go near them again, I will not call a summit. I will call something else entirely." He straightened his jacket and walked out. Curtis Webb folded just as completely. When Min-jun's legal team presented the full picture, the abandonment case, the background check, the expired statute of limitations on Laura's old credit applications that made the Yun's blackmail material legally worthless, Curtis's own attorneys told him he had no chance. He signed papers relinquishing any custody claim. He sent Laura one final text. "I hope she gets better." And then he disappeared again, this time for good. Laura read the text and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, not relief. Just the quiet emptiness of a door finally closing on something that never really existed. The months that followed, were the first peaceful ones Laura had known since Zoe's diagnosis. Zoe's treatment at Phoenix Children's Hospital progressed steadily. Her oncologist, Dr. Roland Jeffries, was brilliant and gentle, and Zoe adored him because he let her pick the color of her medical tape each visit. She always picked purple. Her scans improved. Her energy came back in small, precious increments. She started laughing more. She started demanding purple everything. Purple jello, purple blankets, purple markers. She made drawings of spaceships and taped them to the walls of her hospital room until it looked like a gallery exhibit curated by a 7-year-old astronaut. Min-Jun visited every week. At first, Zoe called him Mommy's friend. Then she started calling him Mr. Serious. He pretended to be offended. She giggled every single time. One afternoon, while Min-Jun sat beside her bed, helping her build a Lego set, Zoe looked up at him with those enormous brown eyes and said, very casually, "You should just come live with us all the time." Min-Jun froze with a Lego brick in his hand. He looked at Zoe. Then he looked at Laura, who was standing in the doorway with her hand pressed over her mouth and tears streaming silently down her cheeks. He looked back at Zoe. "I will think about it." "That means yes," Zoe said confidently. She was not wrong. The relationship between Min-Jun and Laura had evolved from unspoken gravity to quiet certainty. There was no dramatic confession scene, no grand romantic gesture. It happened the way real love happens between two people who have walked through fire together. Slowly, and then all at once, and then so completely that neither of them could remember what life felt like before. One evening in his study, Laura closed her book and looked at him. "I never asked you to save me." Min-Jun did not look up from his laptop. "I know." "So why did you?" He stopped typing. He looked at her. The mask was gone. The armor was gone. All that was left was the man who had heard a woman crying at midnight and could not walk away. "Because you were the first person in this house who made it feel like something other than a building." Laura stood up. She walked to his desk. She took his face in her hands, the way he had taken hers that night she confessed everything, and she kissed him. It was slow and warm and honest, and it felt like every month of distance and longing and fear compressed into a single moment of surrender. Min-Jun kissed her back. His hands found her waist. He pulled her close. And for the first time in either of their lives, neither of them was alone. 14 months after Min-Jun, Kang found his maid crying on the floor of a utility room at midnight. Zoe Whitfield rang the bell. The bell at Phoenix Children's Hospital. The one they let patients ring when they finish cancer treatment. She rang it with both hands, grinning so wide it looked like her face might split in half. She was 8 years old now. Her hair had grown back in thick, dark curls. She was wearing a purple dress because of course she was. The hallway was full of nurses and doctors and staff who had watched this little girl fight for over a year, and every single one of them was clapping and cheering, and some of them were crying. Laura stood beside her daughter, sobbing and laughing at the same time, her hand on Zoe's shoulder, unable to speak. Denise was there, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief and saying, "Lord, Lord, Lord," over and over, the way she always did when something was too big for regular words. And Min-Jun was in the back of the room. He was wearing a dark suit. His expression was controlled, as always, but his eyes were red. And when Zoe finished ringing the bell and sprinted down the hallway and threw her arms around his waist and screamed, "I did IT, Mr. Serious," he dropped to one knee and held this child like she was his own. Because she was. The adoption paperwork had gone through 3 months earlier. Min-Jun had discussed it with Laura first, and with Denise, and even with Zoe herself, who had responded to the question with zero hesitation. "Does this mean I get to call you Dad?" Min-Jun said she could call him whatever she wanted. "Okay, Dad, but also still Mr. Serious sometimes." They were a family now. Not the kind that looks perfect in a photograph, but the kind that is forged in hospital rooms and midnight tears and impossible choices, and the stubborn, terrifying decision to love someone even when the whole world is trying to tear you apart. Laura and Min-Jun were together. Not married yet, though Denise had opinions about that she shared loudly and often. They lived in the Scottsdale estate, which no longer felt like a building. It felt like a home. Denise had her own suite and had taken over the kitchen entirely. displacing the estate's professional chef, who now took orders from a 57-year-old woman from Greensboro who made sweet potato pie so good it had made Seung-ho, the most stoic man on the West Coast, ask for a second slice. Min-jun's operations had stabilized. The Yun family had retreated permanently. Seung-ho was still by his side, still watchful, still loyal. Hana Cho had stepped into the financial role and was excelling. The organization was strong, but something about the way Min-jun led it had changed. Not softer, not weaker, but with a clarity that came from having something to protect that was worth more than any empire. Laura had started painting again. Min-jun converted one of the estate's unused rooms into a studio for her. The first painting she completed hung in his study. It was a small canvas, done in deep blues and purples of a night sky. In the lower left corner, barely visible unless you were looking for it, there was a tiny spaceship. Zoe had requested the color. It was purple. Late one night, long after the bell ringing and the celebration and the drive home and the dinner Denise cooked that could have fed 20 people, the estate went quiet. Zoe was asleep in her room down the hall, a room decorated entirely in purple and space-themed everything. Denise was asleep in her suite. Min-jun and Laura were in the study. Laura was curled against him on the leather sofa. His arm was around her. The house was dark except for the single lamp on his desk, casting warm light across the room. Laura said, quietly, "Do you remember the night you found me crying on that floor?" "Yes." "What would have happened if you had not come downstairs?" Min-jun was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I would have come downstairs eventually. I always do." "Why?" He looked at her, and this time, finally, he smiled. A real, full, unguarded smile. The kind of smile Zoe had been trying to get out of him since the day she called him the serious one. "Because the house was too quiet without you." Laura pressed her face into his chest and closed her eyes. Min-jun held her. The estate was still. The Arizona desert stretched out beyond the windows, vast and dark and ancient, and the sky above it was enormous and black and filled with more stars than either of them could count. Somewhere down the hall, an 8-year-old cancer survivor slept peacefully in a purple room, dreaming of spaceships and astronauts and Mars, and a future she now got to have because a man heard crying at midnight and made the only choice that mattered. He chose not to walk away.